not supposed to have God in the government, are we?
Oh, yeah.
No. Praise God. Thank you, Todd.
Yeah.
Thank you again. Thank you again. I think his report was much better than CNN and MSNBC. And one thing I do know is that I love what our brothers did. Where is it? Black Road Regiment guys did. If you haven't ever read that book and see what pastors did, and if it weren't for pastors, we would not be sitting here. Americans, we would be British. We would still be British. For pastors, you need to know. You need to know we have to be involved in every area of our sheep's lives. Your sheep deal with all these things. Your sheep do. And you are responsible as pastors to be their champion, to protect them, to teach them, to educate them. But we have to do it for ourselves too, don't we? We have to be educated. And today I hope you're getting some of that. Now I have to say I'm just as super excited about having our next guest come, because Linda and I, we watch YouTube a lot, y'all, and we see all kind of reports, and we're seeing people going into churches and shooting people up. Have any of y'all seen any of that? You know what happened in Kentucky just the other day? You know what happened in Michigan a while back? Naples, Florida. Oh, you probably don't know that one unless you're really looking. But there is so much going on in our church campuses today that we have to be prepared. God expects us to pray about things, but He expects us to be active in every area of our life. And protecting those sheep is critical. Deputy Chief Justin Duralia. I could read all this. He's raised in Miami, Florida, attended University of South Florida. My children did, so that's good. He began his law enforcement career with Largo, 1993. 2000, Deputy Chief was hired as a special agent with the Drug Enforcement Administration. So he's been in Tallahassee. I mean, Chief Duralia has got a wide range of experience in law enforcement. But I felt the Holy Spirit just said, we got to talk about this shooter stuff. Because you can stick your head in the sand and somebody's going to come in your church. What are you going to do about it? Today, I am so happy that we're going to find out what we can do about it, how we can be prepared, what can we do, and we need to be prepared for everything, because this is real life. So Deputy Chief Justin Duralia, I'm going to let you tell more about yourself that you want to tell, and I'm so glad that you're here. And I'm so glad that a couple of years ago you and I met. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Paul. I do have an award for you. So, the bar of public speaking is pretty high in my house. So, if anybody here knows my wife, I had the pleasure to hear her speak. She's a phenomenal public speaker.
Yeah.
Now I'm here today speaking to people who speak for a living. So, once again, bar is pretty high. And then Paul puts me on the agenda after this man. Really? I have to follow that? So, yeah, so the bar is even higher. So thanks, Paul, for that. I appreciate it. Paul called me, asked if I would speak to y'all today. And I said yes without hesitation. And at first we talked about, hey, maybe I'll talk about the state of the police department, because I just finished my first year at Plant City Police Department 2 weeks ago. So we're just over 1 year. So it'd be a good opportunity to talk about what myself and the other members of the executive team have done over the course of the last year. State of affairs in Plain City, what crime was like. Then Paul and I had another conversation a few days later. He said, it would be great with everything that's going on in the country, if we talk about security and safety in our places of worship. And I thought that would be a great topic to talk about. I think it affects everyone. If we go to the next slide. So this is illustrating what a significant problem this is. when you look between the years of 2018 and 2023, there's about 800 reports of bias-related crimes against religious institutions on a yearly basis. When you look at the numbers from the Anti-Defamation League, in synagogues and Jewish community centers, you're looking at over 1,000 just in 2023 alone. And that is an increase from previous years. Christian churches have reported over 400 hostile incidents in 2023. So as you can see, not only is this a problem and has been a problem for a while, but it's getting worse. So for these reasons, I thought it was a great idea that we talk about that today. So what I want to talk a little bit about is, I want to highlight an incident. We go next slide, please. Well, actually, we'll talk a little bit more about the type of attacks. Then we're going to talk about an incident that occurred in Texas. And the reason that I picked this one is I think it highlights things that you can do, very practical things you can do to help mitigate this threat. The situations that we all are aware of are the shootings. But that is not the only problem facing religious institutions nowadays. As you can tell, vandalism is the most common form of attack against our churches. Right. That's over 60% of all the incidents against religious institutions are acts of vandalism. Arson and attempted arson, also another issue. But what is the one that garners the most attention? It's our mass shootings, because of what is lost in those attacks. Some of the more famous ones are the ones we're going to talk about. Sutherland Springs, Texas, back in 2017. 26 people were killed that day. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, 2018. 11 killed. And then Charleston, South Carolina, in 2015, 9 were killed. But like I said, I want to highlight the first one, Sutherland Springs, Texas. Can we go to the next slide, please? This happened on November 5th, 2017. Is anybody familiar with Sutherland Springs, Texas, and the idea where it is? Okay, so it's South Texas, about 38 miles outside of San Antonio. It's in, I believe it's Howard County, but it's about 600 is their population. So this particular church has a congregation of about 60. So about 10% of the city's population attends this church. So overall numbers, not a lot of people, but it's very significant when you think about the overall population of Sutherland Springs. Next slide, please. So morning worship service, about 11 o'clock in the morning. The first indication that there was something not right was there was a male subject across the street from the church at a gas station, seen in tactical gear with a rifle. So clearly that's an indicator that something is not right. He actually gets in his vehicle and he drives across the street. Gets out of his car. Now the church service is already in progress. As he gets out of his SUV, he's approaching the front of the church. What's interesting to note about this incident is he engaged the people inside from outside the church. So the first rounds that entered the church wasn't after he entered, it was when he was still in the parking lot. To the point where the people, the parishioners, didn't even really know where the rounds were coming from. He walked around the church and eventually made entry inside, where he continued to shoot. Now, while this is going on about 100 feet away, just to kind of put it in perspective, you have a gas station across the street, and it kind of sits at an intersection. There's also residential homes in the area. Well, about 100 feet away, there was a gentleman who was there with his daughter. He's a plumber. He actually works at the local hospital. He's like on call this weekend. So if there's an incident at the hospital, he has to respond. So he's at the house. Daughter is doing dishes in the kitchen. She hears gunfire. Goes to her father. Says, "Dad, I think somebody's shooting down the street." At first, he dismisses it. Must be something else. She's so concerned, she actually gets in her car and drives down. Remember, it's only 100 feet away. As she's approaching the church, she realizes what's happening. She sees the shooter at the church. And you can actually see inside from outside the church. So she was very clear to what was going on. Goes home, tells her father. Without even putting his shoes on, he grabs his rifle, goes to the church. When he arrives, the shooter is now exited. Now, at this point in time, he had already finished shooting at the church. He had dropped his rifle, and now he was armed with a handgun. The neighbor, the Good Samaritan, basically engages in a gun battle with the shooter in the parking lot of the church. Hits him 4 times. 3 were relatively significant shots. 1 was a grazing shot across his forehead. After they exchange gunfire, the shooter gets in his vehicle and flees the scene. The neighbor gets a guy driving by who stops at the stop sign, basically tells him what had just happened. The driver of the truck said, "Come on, get him, let's go." So they proceed to chase this guy down. At one point, he moves over to the side of the road. The theory is that he was succumbing to his wounds. He manages to continue driving. Then at a point in time, he drives into a fence. Once again, the theory is that he was succumbing to his wounds, but he ultimately takes his own life. Officials with Department of Public Safety say that it was 4 minutes between the 911 call and when the first law enforcement officers arrived. If you look into this incident a little bit, there are some conflicting numbers. Some people will tell you it was over 20 minutes before any law enforcement officers arrived at the church. The 4-minute response time was probably a little bit closer to how long it took deputies to get to the scene where his vehicle ultimately stopped. But the reason that this is so significant is whether it's 4 minutes or whether it's 20 minutes, that is a long time when you have an active shooter in your church. So waiting for a police response. Here in Plant City, we're very fortunate. You are very fortunate because our response time is very quick, especially in an emergency situation. But is it going to be fast enough? That's why I think it's important that you should put a plan in place to potentially deal with something like this and not just rely on a police response, because at that point it might be too late. Next slide. So a lot of this we already went through. I just want to take a moment to talk about the numbers. I threw out 26 people were killed. And we do that a lot. We talk about numbers, whether it's 26 or 26,000. We throw these numbers out there and it doesn't really impact you until you have a chance to listen to the parents of the children that were killed that day. The pastor's own daughter, 14, I believe, she didn't survive. And to hear her parents talk, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to hear them talk about what happened that day and how the mom found out. There's a child as young as 1 year old, and there was an unborn child that didn't survive. So I only tell you that because I don't want that 26 killed to not resonate with people. Even though it's not a very large number, these are 26 members of that community. Everybody knew everybody there. Like I said, only 600 people live in this town. Go to the next slide, please. So what can you do to help mitigate the threat posed by somebody like this? What's interesting about the gentleman who was a suspect in this case, he was not a parishioner of this church, but he was known. His mother-in-law actually attended the church. He had been at 2 services in the past. The pastor there knew of him because he had difficulty with the family. He actually tried to talk to him about some of the problems he was having. He didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to hear from the pastor. Didn't want to be part of the church. So never saw him again. And then he shows up and does this. The reason that he targeted this church, he had issues with his mother-in-law. She was supposed to be there that day, which is why he picked this location. So what can we do to help mitigate the threat? There's a lot of different things that you can do. There's physical security you can do in a church, and there's things that you can do with personnel. So we'll talk a little bit about perimeter security. It's a tough balance because you want to invite people in to worship, and you want it to be an inviting environment. But at the same time, you have to create a safe environment so people can worship without having to worry about this. So there are certain things that you can do to still make it inviting, but still make it safe. Door controls. One-way bar locks, where it's easy for people inside your church to leave by just hitting the bar, but it's going to be difficult for people to come in. So when you're thinking about physical security measures you can put in place, that is one thing that I would recommend. Security cameras. Now, a lot of this is going to be resource dependent. Not everybody has unlimited funds to do some of the things that I'm talking about. And this is not going to be a one-size-fits-all for every church. But just implementing maybe 1 or 2 or 3 of these things I'm going to talk about today could make a difference. So security cameras obviously can help with some of the other things we talked about, whether it be vandalism or some of the other things. But it can also help with this, especially people that are monitoring in real time, whether it be in the parking lot or on the interior. It can give you an advance notice that there are going to be problems and that you can adjust your response accordingly. Same thing with the alarm system. That's going to be more for some of the other threats that we discussed. Next slide, please. So you're going to have your main sanctuary where people are worshiping, but a lot of churches will have, of course, offices and maybe a children's ministry. So there are going to be different areas inside of your church you have to be concerned about. You're obviously going to want to restrict access to these areas. You want everybody in the sanctuary, but you might not want everybody where the children are. You might not want anybody in your private offices. So restricting access with electronic deadbolts, whether it be fingerprint or via code, is one way to restrict access. And then also having a lockdown protocol in place. So if something were to happen, if you do see somebody in the parking lot, having a plan in place to have lockdown protocols in place so that these rooms can be shut down to buy time for a law enforcement response. Next slide. Going along with the plan and lockdown protocols, I would definitely recommend having somebody come to your church and talk about active shooter threats and what an appropriate response for that is. Because what you have to do is you have to have a plan. And there are people that will come out. We have a sergeant in our police department who does this on a regular basis. He's very good at it. He does an excellent presentation. If somebody wants to call us and make arrangements, have somebody come out to your church to do active shooter presentation, we will do that. So you can get with me afterwards, we can talk about that. Or just call the police department and we'll put you in touch with the right people. It's very important that all of your staff is on the same page. Next slide. So let's talk about security and personnel. There are probably different layers that I would recommend. You can have just one, or you could have all of them, but I would definitely consider at least having one. Having off-duty police officers is a good idea, because you'll have armed, trained personnel basically there when you need it, whether it's inside or whether it's outside. A lot of it's going to depend on the layout of your church or what your needs are. But that is an option. I know there are some churches in the community here that do this. And there's a lot of community churches throughout the Tampa Bay area who do this. So it's something to consider. And if you want to look at that as an option, if you're in Plant City, you call the Plant City Police Department and inquire about off-duty employment. But it doesn't have to be Plant City. Here in this community, you can call Plant City Police, Clifford County Sheriff's Office, Floral Highway Patrol. Well, I'm sorry. Is this better? I apologize. Has it been the whole time or just now? I apologize. So, Plain City Police Department, Clifford County Sheriff's Office, Florida Highway Patrol, some other state agencies can do it as well. So, in addition to off-duty law enforcement, what a lot of churches have been doing is hiring their own security personnel, whether that be uniform or plain clothes. Because I know the concern. A lot of people don't want to have uniformed law enforcement inside the church. They don't think it's inviting, so they have concerns about that. Hiring plainclothes security is the way to still have personnel there to protect your parishioners while still creating this inviting environment that is the threat. Some of the churches in our Tampa Bay area do all of that. They will have off-duty law enforcement, they'll have their own private security, they'll also have a volunteer staff within their church. Oftentimes it's retired law enforcement or retired military personnel. Obviously they've been trained in use of firearms or competent use of firearms. And they want to get back, so they volunteer their time at the church to provide that service. What's important if you're going to do any of these things is training, especially when it comes to your volunteer personnel. People are well-intentioned. Everybody in Florida can carry a gun, with some exceptions. But just because you legally carry a firearm doesn't mean you necessarily should carry a firearm. So training in safety is important, and obviously marksmanship. So I know some churches require all their volunteer staff to get a concealed weapons license. Even if it's no longer required, they still have them get it so they can take the class and at least demonstrate that they can safely handle a firearm. In addition to that, I know there's one particular church in Pinellas County that their entire staff trades together in the active shooter stuff that I just described a little while ago, but also they do annual firearms qualification. So they have a team training together not only on tactics, but also firearms proficiency. And they also have a written policy in place that lays all of this out. Because what you don't want is kind of a haphazard plan in place. You want to have it to be organized, you want it to be in writing, do annual training, so when the time comes that they do have to act, it's going to be an effective response, not a haphazard response. Communication. One of the churches that I spoke to, they stressed the importance that all of their staff, since it's not just the police, it's not just private security, it's not just volunteers, they have all three, they have a communication plan in place where they have one radio channel basically for all of that personnel. And they all train together on a regular basis. So even though they're three separate entities, they do train together and they do have the same communication. So where if something were to happen, everybody's on the same page and they can communicate through the incident. Next slide. Some of the other practical tips that were shared with me by some of the churches in the area is putting some restrictions in place on what parishioners could bring into the church. One of the things that they told me about, and one of their concerns was backpacks. As you know, people can conceal a lot of things inside of a backpack. So this one particular church that I spoke to, they have a rule, no backpacks allowed. With other types of bags, for example, a diaper bag, which they will allow people to bring into the church, but they do ask to look inside of it. They have a system in place where they're able to mark that a bag's been inspected. It can be something as simple as a ribbon tied around the handle, and they will change it up on a regular basis, so it's not the same thing every time. But it does communicate to the rest of your security team that yes, this bag is coming inside, but it has been checked. So if you're going to put some things in place, this might be something you want to consider. I know it's somewhat restrictive and not as inviting as we had talked about at the beginning of this, but I think it is an important step that you can put in place to help prevent certain things from being brought in that you don't want brought in. Going back to the written policy, I know I mentioned this before, but I want to say it again because it is so important. You want to have a strong plan in place, especially if you're using a bunch of different entities to provide security for your churches. But having that written policy in place is going to get everybody on the same page, and especially when it comes to the church. Whether if you do have off-duty police officers, private security, volunteers, you're going to have a lot of different types of people, a lot of different types of training. You want to make sure everybody's on the same page. And the only way to really do that is to have some kind of comprehensive written policy that dictates what the response is going to be if something is going to happen, but also what the training is going to be on a regular basis. I would recommend quarterly, but at the very least yearly. And not just the firearm training. You want to have the active shooter training that I referenced, because you want to know, okay, what is our plan going to be if we do see somebody in the parking lot, if we do see this guy across the street. Unfortunately, this church, they didn't really think through that. They didn't have a plan in place, and we see the result. There are some things that you can do with the physical structure that will help as well. What's interesting about this church, they actually built a new church on the adjacent property. When they built that church, they thought about this and considered some of the lessons learned in how they constructed it. This is an older church, mostly wood structure. As I told you before, a lot of the rounds that were fired from outside in. When they built a new church, it was obviously better construction, concrete block, and the windows in the old church sat low. You can see everything from the outside. The new windows sit a little bit higher, above and low. So when they built their new church, they had these things in mind. Now, for pre-existing structures, obviously, you're not going to be able to make those kind of changes, but these are things that you can think about. Not just personnel, but also things you can do structurally, which might be able to help. We actually have a few officers who have attended a training for preventing crime through environmental design. They're actually going to be going to training in December, specifically for things that you can do to provide security at churches. When it comes to designing your building, designing your parking lot, things of that nature. So they would be available to give guidance to anybody here if you would like that. Like I said, they're going to attend their training in December for church-specific considerations. So like I said, if you call us, we'll probably put that together for you. I'm sorry, I keep doing that. Next slide. So, as I mentioned earlier, it's got to be intentional. It cannot be a haphazard plan that you put in place. You want to be proactive. Like I said, the church in Sutherland Springs, they did some environmental changes with the new church, but that's reactive, right? We want to be proactive so we can prevent something like this from happening. Layered. When I talk about the layered approach, it's the different layers of personnel, right? You could have uniformed law enforcement officers, uniformed private security, plainclothes private security, and volunteers. There's one particular church I talk about in Pinellas County. They have all of that. They have a great, robust plan in place. Now, will it prevent everything? No. But if I'm very confident something were to happen at that church, they'd be able to put together a pretty effective response. And number 2 is the biggest thing here, right? You want to balance security concerns with having a place of worship that's inviting to everyone. And I know that's going to be everybody's biggest struggle with what I'm talking about today. I mean, yeah, you could put 50 police officers in the parking lot, but is that really creating the environment that you want to create in your church? But I would caution you against abandoning all of this just because you don't want to give that impression of this training force outside and uniformed police officers. Try to strike that balance. All the things that I'm talking about today might not be for everybody. But you can pick 1 or 2 things to help increase security. I think it would be beneficial. And once again, the written policies and the training. I can't emphasize that enough. Especially when you're dealing with volunteers, private security, uniformed law enforcement officers, different people with different backgrounds and different training. You want to make sure we're on the same page. Go to the next page, please. So we talk about resources. All the things that I'm talking about, what's the one that you need? You need money. There are resources available. The Nonprofit Security Grant Program has provided a lot of funding to nonprofits, specifically churches, over the years. As you can see, fiscal year 2023, $305 million was allocated. Now, I do want to warn you, currently with some of the federal grants, with the new administration, they're reviewing some things, so some things are not as readily accessible as they might have been in the past. I don't think that's going to be a permanent thing. So if you are not getting a lot of response right now, I still wouldn't forget about this. It's definitely something worth looking into. And as you can see, they've provided a lot of funding to churches over the years, and I think they will continue to. So I would just say be patient. But those programs are still available. And you can use it for training. You can use it for some of the physical security members we talked about. And I think even for personnel costs. So I would write this down and do a little bit of research and see if those funds might be available for some of the things you want to put in place.
Then go to FEMA.gov. That's what that will be under.
Okay. Everybody hear that? FEMA.gov if you want additional information on that grant program. I think that may be a good next slide, please. Yeah, I think that's the last one. All right, thanks, gentlemen. I appreciate it. I do want to say one thing. When I came in here today, and this happens a lot in Planet City, so this shouldn't surprise anybody. I think I've had maybe 3 or 4 people thank me for my service. I want to thank you all for your service. Because what you guys do and the message you put out there, it's invaluable. Our society wouldn't be what it is today without you and the message that you put out there, and how impactful what you do, and it's so appreciated. So thank you for your service.
Does anyone have a question? We want a question and answer session here. So, anybody have a question?
Yes, sir.
Terry?
What about the burn a gun as an option for some of the security people to have?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what.
The burn a gun?
I'm not familiar with
It's
that.
like a stun gun.
Yes,
That's
burn a gun is a non-lethal firearm that uses CO2 to shoot a projectile, either tear gas or pepper spray or just an inert bullet to stop the threat.
My opinion is that if you are faced with a deadly force threat, a non-lethal option isn't a good option. So I would not recommend it in a deadly force situation. Even our police officers, they do carry less than lethal options, but those are not options that are appropriate for a deadly force situation. Yes, sir.
This may not be in your wheelhouse, but you can throw it out there. We have a safety security team in place. We're going to have it eventually. One of the gray, kind of muddy water areas is insurance fees. Do you have any resources, thoughts? I know you're not in the insurance business, but
You know, I don't know if everybody heard that question, but he had questions about if you do have a security team in place about having insurance to cover any potential liability concerns. And you are right, that is outside of my wheelhouse, so I don't have any guidance for you on that. But I think it's a valid point and a valid question, and also a valid consideration for anybody looking to do something like this.
And they can help you though. One of our board members is the owner of Strong Tower Insurance. All they do is churches. Earl Burkett, Strong Tower Insurance.
That's who we're with.
And they handle the security. They do. What happens if somebody just comes into the church and they actually have a firearm? What would you recommend if that actually happened? Somebody ran in here right now with a firearm besides you. What would we need to do?
Now, so a lot of that depends on what kind of security. So for anybody who didn't hear the question, what do you do if somebody with a firearm comes in? A lot of it's going to depend on what security measures you have in place. If you have a team in place, then yes, there's going to be an armed response to that armed threat. If you don't have that type of security in place, let's be honest, your options are very limited. Like I talked about before, if somebody were able to call 911, 4 minutes, it's a long time.
What would you?
I mean, yes, I mean, obviously, one of the things that we would teach you in these active shooter trainings is the run, hide, fight philosophy. So the first thing you would do is just that, you would run. If you have an ability to get out of the building, that is the first thing you should do. If it's an office setting, let's say it's an office inside the church or the children's ministry, and you have the ability to lock the doors. Lock the doors. That's why some of the things that I talked about are really good security measures. Restricting access from the outside to the fingerprint or the code. Reinforcement locks. If anybody's stayed at a hotel recently, you have the dead wall, you have the latch, then you have that little thing that kind of flips, a little piece of metal. It's a reinforcement lock. It's a very quick way to provide extra security on the door. And even though it's a small piece of metal, some of those are rated to 800 pounds. So some of the better ones actually provide a good layer of additional security, because what you're trying to do is buy time. It's not going to keep somebody out forever, but if you have that reinforcement lock or you have one of these fingerprint locks, it's going to give you time for the good guys to show up to deal with the threat. And that's what you're trying to do is buy time. Now, if you're not able to run, you're not able to hide, fight is your third option. You are fighting for your life. You are fighting for survival. So whatever you can do, whatever you can grab as a weapon is what you need to do to protect yourself and protect your family. But those three things, I know they don't sound very effective, and they're not. You're basically trying to do the best with what you have, which that's in case you don't have anything, which is why we're talking about the different things you can put in place to where those are not your only options. Yes, sir.
One of the best things I heard somebody say along these lines is that if you can identify the threat and keep them outside, that's your best option. One of the things I think they said, I'm interested in your agree or disagree or explain it. One of the things I think they said is that in many of these church-related incidents, there was an opportunity for someone to keep the threat outside, but they didn't recognize it in time or know how to respond to keep it outside.
Yes, and I don't know if everybody heard what he said, and I think it's a very valid point. I'm glad you brought it up. Is he had heard somebody talk about church security and said one of the most important things you can do to help mitigate this threat is if you can identify the threat before he gets inside and keep him outside. That's one of the most effective things you can do. And I agree with that 100%. If you have layers of personnel like we talked about, security personnel, you can place people outside and inside the church. And your outside team, it could simply be one off-duty police officer or one volunteer. Identify that threat outside, communicate with the personnel inside to lock it down, and then deal with the threat outside the church, which is obviously preferable to having to deal with a deadly threat inside the church. So yes, that's a good point. Thank you. Yes, sir.
And my question is about sheltering in place. If we shelter in place, but we leave a member outside and they get unallowed, is there a criminal liability on our part because we left somebody out?
So the question is, talking about the hide component of what I just discussed, the sheltering in place.
Locking the doors.
If you're locking the doors, preventing anybody from coming in, and then there's, say, a parishioner that is outside the room that is deceased as a result of this criminal act, is there some liability that you could potentially incur?
Correct.
I would argue no, but in this day and age,
It's not something we would want to do, but if
Of
there's
course.
a threat for the masses.
But the protocol would be, and if you decide to go through the full course, that's one of the things we're going to talk about. Like, we'll use children's ministry as an example. If you're locking that down to protect the children in the room, it's no different than what we do in a school setting. Once again, in this day and age, we're very litigious. There's always going to be potential liability regardless of what you do. But I think tactically speaking, that is probably your best course of action to protect those people that are inside. Remember, it has to be a layered approach. We talked about a layered approach. It can't just be a lockdown, right? That has to be one of the things you can do. Having personnel on site, on staff, that are trained to deal with those types of threats, in addition to these lockdown procedures, is probably the best way to approach it. So yes, some people may just choose to do the locks on the interior doors and do the run, hide, fight protocol. But having that layered approach is probably going to be the most effective. So when all these things work together, then you would have a better chance of mitigating that kind of threat.
There's also a great book out there called Left of Bang.
Yes.
It's written by a Marine Corps colonel who
You know, it's
identifies
funny.
threats.
He's talking about a book called Left of Bang, written by a Marine Corps colonel, and it's talking about, so there's bang, right? Everything left of bang is what happens before this incident occurs. And then right of bang would be everything that happens afterwards and reacting to what occurred. The book addresses human characteristics that are displayed by certain people looking to do certain things. So if you have bad guys looking to do bad guy stuff, they will exhibit certain behaviors that if you could recognize it early, you could help stop the bang. So whoever your personnel are in the church, whether it be uniformed police officers or volunteers, that type of training would be very vital because you can pick up on cues. And we all do it, just through the course of our day and through, thousands of years of survival as a species. We instinctively pick up on things. That doesn't feel right. This book addresses that kind of in a more formal manner. And yeah, that type of training would be very beneficial for people that are doing this kind of work. Yes, sir.
Couldn't 200 people pick up 200 songbooks, 200 pew Bibles, and throw them that direction?
Yes, sir. Good.
That's the last thing you can do. You don't have a
200
unity
people pick
church.
up 200 Bibles and not throw them. Yes.
We're missing one right now.
Grab anything you can
And throw it at
and fight.
chairs.
And sometimes that's what it comes down to.
That's the only thing you got. Or hunker down and get shot in the back or the head.
But what I would like to see is I would like to see a more formalized plan in place with other security measures in place. So that's not what we're forced to do.
Target practice with songbooks.
Yes, sir.
Practice starts Saturday.
We have, at any given time, a high percentage of people in our congregation who conceal carry, such that I'm one of the pastors, so I sometimes wonder if the challenge we face is because of the angles in our worship room are being a danger to ourselves as we try to neutralize a threat. Wonder if you have anything to say about that, or...
So what you just described is one of the inherent problems with what we're talking about. So for those who didn't hear the question, he says he has a lot of parishioners that carry concealed in the church. Not as part of an organized volunteer security program, but they're just people that carry and they happen to carry when they go to church on Sunday. That's problematic. Because let's say you have 10 volunteers that are all armed They all train together every year. They all go through the same tactical training. They're all communicating with each other through a common radio. And if something were to happen, they know each other by sight. They've worked with each other for maybe years. And they're able to coordinate their efforts better. But what happens if I show up at your church and I'm dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, and now I come out with a gun? First of all, there's potential tactical errors that can be made as far as crossfire and things of that nature. But then there's also, you might misidentify me as a threat. I'm trying to help. You don't know that because you don't know me. You just know I'm the guy standing in the middle of your church with a gun. That's why having an organized volunteer team is so important that they work together all the time. In a small church where you know everybody, that's less likely to happen. But in some of our larger churches, we don't know everybody, and maybe you have a lot of guests on a regular basis. It's going to be harder to identify the good guys from the bad guys. And that's always a problem, even in law enforcement, for us. When we're plainclothes off duty and trying to respond to an incident that's happening out on the street, we run that risk. So there are certain things that we will do to quickly identify ourselves as law enforcement when uniformed police officers show up. But in a church setting, you're right. That's a definite concern and a really hard thing to deal with because you're reacting in an instant to what you see. You don't know this person, and it's not something you've trained with, and maybe you've never seen him before, but yet he's standing in front of you with a gun. So yeah, that's a problem, and without looking at particular situations and talking through it, it's really hard to come up with a solution to that problem.
One of the we're going to let them come to you individually. If you got more questions, we want to go ahead because everybody, we're on time. Thank you so much.